Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third and last day already of our conference. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce to you this morning Erkki Huhtamo, the man who doesn't really need an introduction, not only because you saw him waking up from his deep sleep, the deep 19th century, a few days ago, but more importantly so today, of course, because Erkki Huhtamo is an internationally acclaimed professor of design, media arts and film, television at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. He's, of course, also the founding figure of media archaeology. He's a collector, collecting items related to the early history of visual media, of course. Professor Huhtamo lectured worldwide, he curated exhibitions, he directed television programs, and he published in more than 10 languages on all the subjects that interest us today. His most important book to date is Illusions in Motion, but I'm happy to learn today also that his new book is forthcoming with a beautiful title, The Fairy Engine, Media Archaeology as Topos Study. We are all very much looking forward to that, but also, of course, today to the lecture with the beautiful title, The Daddy of them All. Erkki, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Kurt. I have to say that I didn't fully understand what you were saying. I'm hearing rumors that there appeared some crazy impersonator the other day who slightly looked like me. People asked me if I have a brother. I said, no, I never had any, I have no brother. So obviously that person was doing things that nobody should ever do with lantern slides, combining some priceless early phantasmagoria, Jules Dubosc slides, Carpenter and Westley slides with €1 crap from the late 19th century. So don't ever do whoever that was, whatever that person was doing. So anyway, I have to prove my case and offer you something very different today. And I hope that what you will be hearing now in the next maybe 35 minutes, hopefully followed by some questions, is going to be something new, if such a thing exists in the world. This talk will focus mainly on one magic lantern and moving picture, Showman, John Pierce Dibble from the United States. And there's a special reason for this talk. Curiously, I believe that this talk starts a little bit in the same way as that charlatan's talk I hear started the other day with a kind of a box. This is a little bit of a different kind of a box. As you see, it's a suitcase. And when you open the suitcase, it contains a handwritten manuscript. And this manuscript is actually not less than 1,268 pages long. And it was written by a person who called himself Pop Dibble, Daddy of them all. His 70 years recollections of picture shows and other things, a hodgepodge of memory. This manuscript was written between 1929 and 31. This is the copyright page, and John Dibble at that time tried to persuade American publisher Doubleday to publish it as a book, but that never happened. This book was bought, the manuscript was bought by late Magic Lantern collector Jack Judgen in the year, let me see, the 2000, trying to see, 2000, no, actually 93. 1993 already. And he got it from this Showman's later family member. Jack Judgeon wanted to publish this thing, but it somehow never happened. Jack's museum, which was in San Antonio, the Magic Lantern Castle Museum, was dispersed. Collections went here and there, and a smaller part of that collection ended up in my collection. And that part included this manuscript by John P. Dibble, and a couple of other things by Dibble, including these portraits. Here you see on the left card to visit, and then on the right cabinet card portrait of this Magic Lantern Showman. And he actually wanted to use the one on the right as the frontispiece for that book that never happened. Dibble writes, "The following autobiography of a long, though humble and unobstructive life of at present time more than 3/4 of a century in length is written by one, at first very reluctantly, after and because of the many urgent requests for the same by friends both personal and those interested and prominent in the moving picture industry, including several producers, exhibitors and publishers." So why did Dibble actually write this, take the trouble of, at the age of 76, writing this mammoth autobiography? In 1922, the leading moving picture industry publication, Moving Picture World, started a competition called the Daddy of Them All. So they wanted to find the oldest exhibitor still in business in the United States or Canada. So John P. Dibble, who was actually born 1853, was still active. He was leasing a cinema called the Park Theatre in his hometown Branford, Connecticut. And he saw this announcement and decided to suggest himself as a candidate. So he sent a package of material to the Moving Picture World. This was the publication by Martin Quigley Sr., the eminent publication. He sent newspapers, samples of film clips from the earliest times and other things. And so it happened that in the January 27, 1923 issue, an article appeared saying, "Hats off to John P. Dibble, the daddy of them all." So he came to be selected as winner of this competition. As part of the certain kind of award, if you would say that, the publication, which in the meantime actually changed its name through certain kind of business deals to Exhibitors Herald and Moving Picture World, invited him to write an article, a long article, which was published in 3 installments in April 1928 under the title, "I Knew Them Films When." And in a certain way, this article was the beginning of that manuscript work. Especially close to home, close to Branford and New Haven in Connecticut, where he had been spending most of his life, he became a local celebrity. Articles kept on appearing by or about Bob Dibble for several years. But the interesting thing for us is that Dibble actually has started his life as a traveling picture showman much earlier. So it actually happened in 1872, which curiously is the way that that charlatan the other day seems to have claimed that he fell asleep and traveled 150 years to the future. I wonder how that happened. But anyway, so here is the story about how Dibble ended up starting this Magic Lantern business. He came from well-to-do farming family just outside the small town of Brantford in Connecticut. And he was considering a military career and waiting for a place to open at the Military Academy of West Point, and that never happened. And he writes, as nothing serious happened to the winner number 1 during his following 4 years at West Point, winner number 2, so Dibble, who was the substitute, filled in the time by purchasing in Philadelphia a first-class oxyhydrogen light, dissolving view stereopticon picture show, with which I toured the country till the first movies arrived. Dibble, like many others, had already experienced magic lanterns and other shows in different ways. And I will not have time in this short presentation to read all these things. I just put some quotations from that interesting manuscript here for you to see the quality. So he writes about how in the school building where he went to school in Brantford, which was used also for touring popular shows, he had actually years ago seen a magic lantern show with by a professor who actually was using the kerosene light in the magic lantern, and he gives actually quite colorful descriptions of those early shows. And he claims that having seen that show, which, like he says, see, he gave what I then thought a fine show, yet no doubt I have seen some better ones since. Anyway, I was so deeply interested that I decided right then and there someday I would be a picture showman. And Dibble also lists many of the other shows he saw in his youth, which obviously had an impact on his future, and also describes shows that he gave at the family's attic with, like he says, a respectable toy magic lantern in those years. Now, what is needed to become a touring magic lantern showman? This is his reply. So I then, soon after leaving school, which is Collegiate and Commercial Institute of New Haven, I succeeded in raising the required cash and proceeded to Philadelphia, where I purchased from the City Milligan Company, Chestnut Street, the finest oxyhydrogen dissolving view stereopticon and views for the same that had then been produced. The year was 1872, but there is a problem because Milligan, Charles T. Milligan, really started his own business only in 1877. So we could... That's not me. Anyway. So there's a problem because the company didn't exist, but this is a typical case when we think about Memoirs, also written much later. So Milligan, don't have time for this part of the American magic lantern history, but Milligan actually had been responsible already for the William McAllister's magic lantern business, which is in the same address, and he bought that from McAllister. So maybe actually maybe Dibble actually bought his apparatus from McAllister, but was actually dealing with Milligan. These are little details that I don't think we can solve right in this case. So dissolving view apparatuses had been available in the American market for quite some time. Some of the earliest ones would be imported Carpenter and Wesley improved phantasmagoria lantern pairs that Benjamin Pike sold in New York. But these were, as you know, these were oil-burning dissolving view devices. Queen, James Queen, which was located on the same street, Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, actually sold pretty impressive dissolving view gas-operated dissolving view devices already in the early 1860s, like this one. And then we come to the question about Millikan, and this is what Millikan offered in the 1879, which is actually an oil burning pair mainly. So interesting question for me, probably for others too. Would this be what he bought, or would it be something else? We actually don't know. People actually combined their own dissolving view apparatuses by buying also separate lanterns and trying to match their optics. Like we see here on the left, William McAllister's Art Opticon and its competitor Lorenzo Marsi's Psyopticon on the right, behind a shared dissolving view kind of shutter. So when the Dibble show started, there were 3 Dibble brothers who hit the road. And so Frank Dibble was the 2 years younger, served as business agent, and they had a third brother, Cornelius Dibble, who works as the so-called advance agent, which means who traveled a little bit ahead of time, made some deals and distributed broadsides and handbills and things like that. Okay, and the father helped these brothers. They were a fairly affluent family, old American Connecticut family, by ordering a nice show wagon for them, which was actually with a pair of finely matched black horses and silver-mounted harness for the same. So the original form of traveling was by horse. And with great luck, we do actually have one of the earliest broadsides, which would take too long here to sort of like go through. This is also from my collection. This is when the show was at the Academy Hall, New Hartford, on Wednesday evening, November 10, 1875. Dibble Brothers Mammoth Palace Hall Panorama of the World. Here we also see the nomenclature issue, because it was not at all a panorama. It was pure Magic Lantern show. So they were announcing 200 magnificent views and used pretty kind of like amazing praise with adjectives for their show. These were very young people at the moment, so around 20. This elaborate broadsides actually is interesting, because it shows to what degree these young people had internalized the conventions, discursive conventions that the showmen were using to advertise their shows. It reads very professionally in many ways. But it didn't actually prevent a local Reverend Eldridge making a little comment, say, "Johnny, you positively are the most wonderful adjective slinger I have ever met." And he actually worked for a little while as a lecturer for these brothers when they were trying to raise funds by their shows for the local New Methodist Church. We could actually reconstruct pretty well this program itself from the backside of the broadside. It's one of the most detailed I've ever seen, listing all the slides with numerous dissolving views. Many were photographic slides. Clearly, this was a novelty at the time, and Philadelphia was a center of the photographic lantern slides in the wake of the Langenheim brothers' invention around 1860. And so they also list numerous mechanical effect slides and comical slipping slide as usual. But it's interesting that we don't really see these slipping slides advertised much in the broadside. And this is something that he commented on later. He said, I had a collection of comic slides, but these I cannot recommend so highly at the present time, for they were simply awful. But these were the things that could easily lead to a scream and sort of like other expressions of sort of like kind of enthusiasm among the audience. So he showed, but made sure that there were not more than 6 or 8 of them in an evening. This is the kind of information you get from this unique manuscript. So he actually describes what was shown in the shows and how. So he also tried some other things like adding variety acts with musicians and magicians, but had to drop them soon because of economic trouble in the United States. This was the panic of 1873 and the recession that followed. So he went back to showing magic lantern slides. These are some of the subsequent magic lantern exhibitions he put together. So Centennial Show around the world with General Grant following Ulysses Grant's world tour. No doubt recycling many of his existing lantern slides that he had bought in Philadelphia. Then of course, the typical Arctic exposition show, the frozen north, and after that, Great Johnstown Flood. And there may have been others, but these are the ones that you can easily find from his narrative in the story, in the autobiography. But then something interesting happens, and this is, at least for me, quite exciting. So he writes, at the time of the murder of President Garfield, this was 1881, so Frank, the younger brother, left the company to concentrate on other businesses. So, and John Dibble decided to reorient in a way or adjust his profile. And now, interesting thing happens. I utilized my stereopticon. So stereopticon is the American word for high-class professional magic lantern. I utilized my stereopticon as an advertising medium and followed up that line of picture show quite successfully for several years, especially in the spring, summer, and fall seasons, working the stereopticon lectures and shows in the winter season only. So this sets up an interesting pattern. So, and he worked for many clients, including George Bunnell, who ran this Bunnell's Opera House in New Haven, John Wanamaker, the pioneering department store owner in Philadelphia, and many others. This trend of using magic lanterns outdoors was a novelty at the time. Some competitors claimed that they were using automated magic lanterns outside, like this automatic stereopticon advertising company from Boston. This is a trade card from my collection. Backside is here. But Dibble didn't automate anything. So he actually spent many evenings and early nights with his stereopticon apparatus in outdoor locations. And even though this is long, I'm observing the time, so we started a little bit late, so I think we can go through. I think I will read this because this is really interesting information you don't get easily from anywhere. So he says, my scheme was to secure in the larger cities a prominent central location on some low building or other conspicuous location. I would then every night for several weeks or months in each city show my views interspersed with advertising cards of local merchants and businessmen whose orders for same and at good paying rates I had no trouble at all in securing. Stereopticon advertising being at the time a novelty and a new scheme, thus making it a nice little business, as my expenses were very, very small. I could even usually pay my rental for the location in advertising, and in fact most of my other bills in the same manner. As my free show was a novelty, it of course drew and held crowds, thus advertising itself while also advertising my local merchant customers. He advertised also often animals, so which means advertising circuses and menageries, including Morris Brothers Dog and Pony Show in New York and Barnum's and Bailey's Circus. And this basically also is described in detail in the manuscript. This is actually example from this picture from England, but similar operation. So he said, attractive views and advertising slides illustrating the circus and menagerie were made, and my work was to project the same on canvas in some prominent street location in the towns booked for the circus from 3 days to a week in advance of the big show. And then he added, it was a summer of hard work for me, and it surely was. If he had to travel constantly ahead of those circuses that were moving from place to place, spend all the evenings and early nights projecting those specially made advertising slides for those tent shows, those touring attractions. He also had a little bit to do with the election projections. He was a very staunch Republican, but he didn't obviously do too much of this side of this outdoor Magic Lantern publication. This is from the McAllister catalog, showing different ways. Okay, so we have a little bit of time, so I'll say a few words about how he discovered moving pictures. So 1985, he continued pretty much the same way, so showing both stereopticon advertising in his hometown now, New Haven, opposite the post office, a standard location for a long time for him, and then also presented his illustrated lectures in halls in New Haven and elsewhere in New England mainly. But sometimes actually he traveled with his advertising show all the way to Florida. So all the way on the east side of the United States, making like long trips too. So he became intensely interested in moving pictures early on, and claims that he actually went to Edison's factory in Orange, New Jersey, and bought his early kinetoscope and really first films from there, and started showing already 1896, which is obviously the claim for being the daddy of them all. This is a rare photograph that actually survives. This shows old Dibble with his early Edison projecting kinetoscope. This is he's posing after winning that title from the moving picture world in 1920s. And this is actually the machine that he originally used like this as a spool bank machine. He speaks about spool rack. So the movies were in continuous loops, but he didn't like it, so he very quickly started using these early Edison and also Lumiere with Edison sprocket holes, Méliès films from single reels like this. So this is all described in detail in the manuscript, and so it was natural for him that the moving pictures were a continuation of his already long work as a Magic Lantern showman. So these were added gimmick, and he describes in detail how he combined his stereopticon machine and the kinetoscope side by side, kept on switching between films and slide programs. Plenty to say about that. Cannot go into that. So there is a trail of advertising. Thanks for Susan for helping me with finding some of these things. There are plenty of newspaper ads and things. So you see he added illustrated songs. Being a Magic Lantern showman obviously helped by 1900. So this is documented here. And so Spanish-American War was important for him and many other show people. He called his show the War Graph. And here it doesn't say Dibble, but I think it's probably Dibble. This is also from my collection. He also associated his name with Edison. there are plenty to say about his tours and things. I will pass this by so that we can actually have some time to talk. But so there is a certain trail that needs to be researched better of broadsides and handbills, which we can find. These are just examples I'm showing to you here. And this is 1909, and this is very interesting for me. This is from Glenn's Falls Daily Times, where he actually already shows this awareness of those things that came to happen in the 1920s, because he says that this is under the personal direction of the original moving picture operator and manager John B. Dibble, first on the road in this business, the most successful and still the leading man in the business. Of course, this thing can be about like self-promotion, but perhaps there is a certain other edge to that as well. Now, the final part of this talk, quickly. So I think that a very good way of trying to assess the importance of Dibble is to think about this already kind of classic book by Charles Musser and Carol Nelson, High Class Moving Pictures, which profiled in great detail another, at that point, forgotten showman, Lyman Hove. And so what they did, they basically said there are many points, of course, but two important points which I think we should associate with Dibble. So they write in, Musser and Nelson, one concrete goal of this investigation is to provide a professional biography of an exhibitor who was involved in motion pictures from the outset. It is not, and it cannot be, a study of the man's inner life. No personal correspondence survives. Interviews and accounts focus on his public persona, providing only the barest glimpse of his private life and thoughts. Lyman Hove, moreover, was often a construct, a commercial fiction. So after 1899, the person carrying that name no longer traveled with the show. None of this applies to show people like Dibble, because Dibble made it a point of pride for himself that he always showed the magic lantern slides himself, and he showed the films himself, and he did it until he was very old. So he worked until he was over 80 every day, projecting movies and also projecting slides from the times, even in the late times. So their profiles were also very different. Lyman Home was business oriented and became this kind of like a trademark for certain kind of shows. I don't go into these so that we can stop. Lyman Hove's posters can even be seen in postcards like these ones, where they're sort of like randomly there, like this one or that one. So you see his posters or broadsides on the walls. These are not his promotional postcards. They're just normal postcards. And he also went into production himself. Dibble never did that. And it's funny to see that one of the only books where Dibble is mentioned is actually this book by Musser and Nelson. But the information is almost totally wrong. So because they didn't know. For example, they claimed that he was a store owner, and when J.M. Dibble died, so they killed John Dibble's wife, Jocelyn McConaughey Dibble, even though she lived until 1943. So I don't know how Musser decided to kill her several decades prematurely, and many other things. So comparison, I already made it, so I don't have to go to this. So Dibble was really a jack of all trades, so he didn't do a distribution of tasks. So he insisted on doing everything himself. He was projecting, doing everything, whatever. And now the final slides. So a media archaeological question. So what happened to Dibble's material? And this is a quotation from supposedly from his wife. Yes, Pop, you have saved everything you ever had, except money. So they were not wealthy when they died. So we have the documents. This is the probate court record right after Dibble's death in 1943, which shows that he actually had kept all these objects. So he had a lot of lantern slides. So he had films. He had his early model number 1 kinetoscope and Powers camerograph projectors and so on. We also see, and this was the picture I already showed. This is a picture where a relative, Ruth McDougall, is actually shown. Some of these things probably after he passed away. So we see the kinetoscope on the left, and there is a smaller oil-burning magic lantern which cannot be the dissolving view apparatus, and so on. So these things were considered to be of no value. You see no value, and I think everything was sold together for $30 and disappeared right away. But Ruth McDougall and her family kept some of the papers, and they magically surfaced 5 years ago. So Judge never saw those papers, but and these photos are part of it. So that's all. So my question, can Dibble's wish to be published still be fulfilled? I imagine there is a lot of interesting material in this book. I'm actually quite excited about it in many ways. I think it is a discovery and adds something unknown to our common interest, which is this reconstructing and continuing this magic lantern heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erkki, for this really fascinating presentation. And wow, what a splendid material. So most of the time we researchers, we act as detectives trying to reconstruct the performances of the magic lanterns, but it seemed that you found a gold mine here. So we have a few minutes left for questions or comments, so I hope to... Sabine.
Erkki, great, thank you very much. I wonder, normally biographies are written, and especially this one, which was supposed to be published.
Yeah, we had it yesterday also.
My question is, in how far? What did he skip? For example, you didn't mention final questions. They only came up at the end when he was already dead. So what do you think is missing in his autobiography?
Yes, I think you are absolutely right, Sabine, that of course we cannot take publication published at the end of a life at face value, that's for sure. I think that the general tone of the publication, I have to say, is kind of humble. He's not doing a Barnum act like pushing himself, that's for sure. It comes all in his style, and he mentions it many times. But surely there are gaps, I'm sure. So one of the gaps is definitely that he says very little about these other people who must have worked with him, you know, like lecturers, other parts of his team. So we don't get a clear idea. So in that sense, it looks like it does in a way centralize Bob Dibble, and it centralizes him for psychologically obvious reasons. That he, from total oblivion, total anonymity. So through this occasion that happened because of the moving picture world competition, he all of a sudden popped into kind of like awareness, and that may have affected, of course, himself. He started seeing himself as somebody retroactively, so to say, even though I showed this one newspaper ad, which 1909, which in a way shows something already that earlier, that he was conscious that he was making the claim that he started before Vanhoutte, that he claimed that he was the first moving picture showman in 1896 who hit the road, touring man. We don't know exactly if that's right. So the Masser and Nelson don't think so. They think that he actually started the year after. These are obviously issues for research. But I mean, it's a psychologically interesting document because, in a certain way, it provides that interiority which is missing from Masser's and Nelson's portrait of Vanhoutte.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, two perhaps. So I make a little sprint here. Artemis. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning, Erkki. You know, one of the things that I love about your work is that it kind of is just a demonstration of method and approach, just the doing. And you truly are a time traveler. And so I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about, applying like a period eye to this material and kind of how, just elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I haven't really done that research yet. I think it is a task, obviously. So I approach things as I'm a trained cultural historian, so which means that as you know, I try to put things into the context in their own time, and I don't think I probably wouldn't speculate on that in this small moment, but I'm just kind of acknowledging that task, and I think that this does provide material. But we also have to see this manuscript as a product of its own time. This was the time of the golden age of the silent film, and the talkies were just making their breakthrough while he was writing. So that also has to be taken into account.
Thanks. One last brief question. Frank?
Thank you very much, Erkki. I was just want to pick up on something you just said. So Dibble did the projection, but not necessarily or not at all the lecturing. So he's a different type of traveling showman from, let's say, Burton Holmes, where he probably had to hire projectionists in order to stand in the. Sorry.
Oscar Depew.
Yeah. Okay. So but then we have a different. So one we have on one side we have the projectionist highlighted in the bills, in the handbills, and the other the lecturer.
I have a quick answer. Yes, that's correct. I think so. In the very early time, when they just hit the road as young people, so they say that he actually gave the lecture. So this was the 1870s, for which we have the broadside. So, and that obviously leads to the conclusion that maybe it was his brother Frank who actually operated the lantern at that point, if that's the case. But very quickly, it seems like Dibble, maybe he liked that technical side of things. So Dibble actually became the lanternist, and he became the moving picture showman. And he makes a point several times in this big manuscript that he's proud that I always did it myself. And even when he was old and he was renting a movie theater, like a monkey, I climbed every day up to the projection booth, without any problem. He was like 80. So he was proud of that. He was proud of his great health. He said, I've never been sick in my life. I worked every day of my life. So he loved that. He's just like a sympathetic personality, I have to say, judging by this manuscript. But he says very little about his lecturers, whom he must have hired. So that is also the question that goes back to what Sabine was asking about these significant absences and gaps in this kind of, and maybe distortions too, in this kind of documents.
Okay, so thank you again very much, Erkki, for this presentation.